Turn to more news coming in this hour. Thousands of Americans took to the streets across the country for the 50,501 protests. That's 50501. Named for 50 protests, 50 states, one movement, coinciding with the 250th anniversary of the start of the American Revolutionary War. Demonstrations took place from outside the White House to Tesla dealerships, with many protesters voicing various grievances, including calls for the return of Kilmár Ábrego García, who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. Political protests in the U.S. have become more frequent, with earlier demonstrations like the hands-off protests in April drawing tens of thousands. According to the latest Gallup poll, 45% of voters approve of President Trump's performance in his first quarter, although that's lower than the 60% average for past presidents. Protests focused on Trump's Department of Government Efficiency initiative, which aims to cut government jobs, as well as his refusal to press for Ábrego García's return. The protests were largely peaceful, with a few confrontations, and many demonstrators carried signs reading "No Kings," referencing the anniversary of the start of the revolution against British rule. In Boston, attendees commemorated the battles of Lexington and Concord, reflecting on the ongoing fight for liberty. Protests also took place across the nation, signaling increasing discontent with Trump's leadership, especially regarding his handling of the economy. Despite earlier rallies and a dip in Trump's approval ratings, protests are showing no signs of slowing down. Let's listen in to what some of the protesters had to say.
I think America's great because of the diversity we have, and my family members from different countries work so hard to come here, and my students pay a lot of money and work hard to come here too, and they shouldn't feel unsafe on campus.
I know that there are people that, claim to be Republicans. They feel like they don't have a voice. It's not the Republican Party they joined. And so we need to get together on those issues and become issue-based. We're trying to do that and not be divisive in our message, but to say that we are united on building back that democracy, to being a partner to the world, to being that beacon that we used to be fair, to be inclusive, to be all those things that our country stands.
Quinton A. Hitchcock, American political consultant, continues to be live with us from Washington, D.C. in the United States of America. Quinton, what do you make of these protests that have erupted across the U.S.? How are they being viewed in the states where you are?
Well, interesting question. I think that anytime Trump has been in office, and I do mean anytime, there have been protests. Maybe not nationwide protests, but we've certainly had very aggressive, very large-scale protests in this country about any specific issues. None more sensitive than, I think, the war in Gaza. None more sensitive than immigration policy. So this is nothing new. This administration is well acclimated to certain opposition and protests by now. So I don't think anything is unusual about this. But again, and I think this is worth saying again, we are living in unprecedented times in America, specifically with how our executive branch is always at odds with our legal system in this country, how there are so many things playing out in our court system on a daily basis, immigration not being the only one. So it'll be very, very interesting to see how this plays out. Remember, there's also a political aspect to this as well. We have our United States midterm elections in about 18 months, and that will dictate who has power in this country. Are we going to have a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican White House? Because if that's the case, that's what's making this process, that is what's allowing this to happen, is that the other side doesn't have the power, they don't have the members, they don't have the votes to really push back on anything from a legislative standpoint. So that's why a lot of this is having to take place in the courts. But when we have our elections in 18 months, that'll be a referendum on whether people in this country agree with how the president has handled immigration, or if they think he's gone a little bit too far.
All right. Also, Quinton, as far as, of course, these protests in particular are concerned, were they just for a day to mark, of course, this occasion? Do we expect them to continue to this coming week as well? And was there any agenda of the protests? Were they, for instance, taking on the DOGE, or was it overall against the Trump administration in its entirety?
Well, the first answer to your question, I don't think it's going to be a protest that lasts many days. let's remember most of these people have to go to work on Monday. So I think this was a weekend protest. I do not expect it to last much longer than that. Now, the other part of your question, who exactly are they protesting? You mentioned Doge, for example. While I don't think they were protesting Doge, I don't think you need to convince any Democrat in this country to protest Doge. I think there's a lot of different aspects of the president's administration that are wildly unpopular with the Democrat Party, with the Progressive Party in this country. So I don't think they were out there protesting those aspects. I think this was solely about the immigration issue. But that being said, it's worth noting there are many, many issues that the president gets protested on a daily basis in this country. So nothing like that is unprecedented.
All right. Also now, Quinton, if we talk about the approval ratings, they're still reportedly at 45% according to some reports of Donald Trump. That's still high. It's slightly lower than what other presidents have had in the first quarter of their term. What do you make of those reports of the approval ratings of Trump?
Well, the approval ratings for him are very high. And statistically and historically, that has not always been the case, especially with President Trump. I'll use 2016 as an example. He gets elected, he wins the Electoral College narrowly. People say, okay, let's give him a fair shot. He gets in office, and his approval ratings could not be any lower. In fact, if memory serves me correctly, I think at one point he may have had some of the lowest approval ratings of any sitting president in history. Well, that's not the case anymore. And I think there's many, many political issues and political reasons for that. But it's also important to realize that the Democrat Party in this country, their approval ratings and their popularity as a whole has never been lower. And that's a real issue for them. That's a real concern that you see a lot of leaders in the Democrat Party voice, especially with elections coming up, that their popularity is just not resonating. Their policy views, a lot of what they are selling the American people is just not resonating with them. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. But the president's approval ratings, at least for right now, are very, very high. Now, the one last thing I'll add is that we have polled in this country the Americans' view on specific issues, not just the president, but specific issues as it relates to him. One of those issues is the handling of deporting illegal immigrants, which again is even without due process. And you'd be shocked to find that many Americans are actually, I would even say most Americans are supportive of how the president has handled immigration policy. So the more we talk about immigration, I think the more we talk about foreign wars, the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, this is making this president look that much stronger.
All right. Appreciate you joining us, Quinton Hitchcock, with your perspective on that